All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Raw Intuition Health Show. We've got another incredible guest and show topic to throw at you today. We've got Dr. Vincent Esposito with us today, and he's going to be talking about sleep and circadian rhythm and how we can rebalance or, just kind of bring into rhythm our circadian rhythm. Yeah, a little didn't say that the best, but we're gonna bring it back into balance. We're gonna resync with nature and get us all feeling our best. So just a little bit about Dr. Vincent Esposito. He is a holistic health expert and doctor with advanced training in chiropractic care and nutrition, breathwork, and herbal medicine. His passion lies in the realm of mind, body, spirit medicine, gut health, breathwork, herbalism, detoxification, iridology, and harnessing the healing power of food. He provides a comprehensive, personalized approach to patient care, drawing on his extensive knowledge of natural healthcare practices and functional medicine. Based in Brooklyn, New York, Dr. Esposito works both virtually and in person, focusing on structural, nutritional, and emotional aspects to uncover and address the root causes of health issues. So, as I said, in this episode, we will be discussing 6 ways to master or balance your circadian rhythm. And let's bring Dr. Vincent on the show. What's up, Dr. Vincent? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Amazing. I'm very happy to have you on the show. I'm honored that you took some time out of your busy day to share with us some of your wisdom and talk about, how we can bring back into balance our circadian rhythm. Because I feel like, especially over the last, several years, I think people's circadian rhythms have gotten out of sync a little bit with the natural cycles of the world. With all the electronics and erratic eating and sleeping behaviors that people have. I think this is a very needed show, and I'm glad that we have your expertise here to help people out.
Well, thanks. And it's an honor for you to have me on. I love talking about this stuff because I think on top of some of like the nutrition and food forward part, which I know you've covered on this show before, so I mean I'm sure I could add to it, but it's probably not anything new. A lot of your listeners might hear maybe tidbits, but not the overall concept is kind of goes with it.
Sure.
But like two, I think, issues, especially like modern folks that I've seen in practice, even more so than the food stuff that is are the hardest hurdles for people to get over, are getting the sleep, light, circadian health stuff kind of in line.
Yep.
And then it's movement, which I know we'll probably touch on that. I don't want to step on that too much, but like without either of those things, even if you have like, the ideal, herbs and nutrition output, it's going to be really hard to get to where you want to go, particularly on the sleep front, because that's when the healing, the detoxification, the regeneration happens. So if you're
Sure.
not doing that, or you're cutting that out, or you're cutting it short, you're really kind of hamstringing yourself. And most people, I get it, people are busy. Like, what are the things that get cut out first, right? It's usually sleep and it's an exercise routine. So,
Sure.
yeah. So, I'm glad we're going to talk about it and why it's important. And I think how kind of the modern life really makes it even more difficult probably than it's ever been.
Yeah, definitely. And as everybody knows, at the end of the show, so everybody hold your questions to the end because we're going to do the Q&A, so you can ask Dr. Vincent all of your questions about this topic. You're also going to be in the running to get a free ebook of mine, and Dr. Vincent is going to offer an ebook that he has as well. Dr. Vincent, do you want to share about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few actually on my website, but one that goes perfectly in line with the show is actually called How to Get World Class Sleep. Very on the nose, like what it is.
Nice.
So some of the tips we're going to talk about are going to be in that. There's a lot more in here to that, but Um, like these are the things that I work with my patients with on a regular basis. And I wanted to put it kind of in written form so that basically anyone can, benefit from it. So, it is, I'd say, fairly simple, but simple and easy aren't synonyms, as I've come to learn over the years. So,
Sure.
and there's just more to it now than say there's ever been, especially if you count like the last 50 or so years with the advent of technology and such. So there is more to do, but it is simple.
Perfect. I love it. And I think that's what people need, though, is they need, a clear, simple way to kind of implement some of these things. So I'm excited to get somebody in the audience your book there, and then also whichever one of my books, ebooks you would like. Yeah, just ask a question, and at the end we'll draw a name for one lucky viewer. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. I see everybody in the chat. I'm still working on getting my chat pulled up here. It's usually right in front of me, but now I don't know, something happened with my program, so I have to look. But I do see there's quite a bit of activity going on, so I appreciate everybody being here. Dylan, Tessa, Carl, great to see everybody. Hope you guys are gonna get a lot from this conversation. I'm pretty positive that you will. So. To start us off, Dr. Vincent, can you just share a little bit about your journey? Like, what was it that got you into wanting to be a doctor, getting into holistic health and nutrition and that sort of thing? Did you grow up as a healthy person, or did you have to find that later on?
Yeah.
What's the story?
Yeah. I feel like to some degree, anyone who goes down this path, whether they get a more, say, formalized doctor training or even something that doesn't include that, or as, rigid, if you will, uh, it's something I feel like you're chosen for, or I should say it chooses you.
Yeah.
And usually that's due to some sort of like life circumstance. I will say I was lucky enough, at least as a kid, to be generally like healthy. And really my health challenges started when I went away to undergrad for college. So uh, for me, I went to school. I generally was healthy going into that. I was playing a sport in college, and I really didn't have any, you know, drive or to do anything in particular at that time. I wanted to play baseball and I wanted to kind of just be around it. And I was into sports and like sports nutrition to a degree, but like as far as career path, I didn't have one. Um, so I worked with the strength and conditioning coach actually as like an athletic trainer and helping work with other people on campus. But especially through my freshman and sophomore years, I'd say like the first 18-ish months, I put on like 25-ish pounds. And at the time, in my infinite wisdom, I thought it was, oh, it's just like muscle mass, you're getting bigger, whatever. And just kind of shrugged it off and ignored really the other things that I was dealing with that I never had before. So I've always been a what we would call a morning person. But I noticed I would start relying on things like caffeine and coffee, which I never had until I went to college. I just felt sluggish. I was having issues with, bowel movements, like just kind of like alternating constipation, diarrhea, brain fog, kind of like general low grade stuff. And it's funny because we would go to like the cafeteria and we just kind of like sit around and talk about like, you know, like aching pains and all this stuff. And, we're 19, 20 years old. And like looking back on it now, it's like ridiculous to think like, oh, like this is just part of getting older. Like this is what we're saying and we're 20.
Yeah.
Like that like it's a preposterous thing to say, but these are some of the conversations we were having. So anyway, I keep going. What I really got towards the end of working with the strength and conditioning coach was helping kids who were rehabbing. So
Mm.
coming off of injuries, trying to get back on the field, on the court, whatever. And I decided I knew I didn't want to go to medical school because I want to do something a bit more hands-on. So I was thinking chiropractic school or PT. I happen to have some family members who are in chiropractic, so I decided to go that route. Went into chiropractic school right after I graduated. Had the same health issues for about a year. And then by the time I was taking biochemistry now in chiropractic school, it was taught by a naturopath, and she just taught it in a much different way than I learned it in undergrad.
Mhm.
And it inspired me enough. The school I went to happened to offer a nutrition program. So I basically took both at the same time. And towards the end of the nutrition program, or I'd say about halfway through, I realized, hey, I'm still having all these health issues I had, 4 or 5 years ago in college. Why don't I start employing some of this stuff that I was learning? And not only was it just the courses, I was kind of doing my own stuff. This was my introduction into things like the Blue Zones and some of T. Colin Campbell's books, and some of Robert Morse's work. And I started just very simply, like slowly making some of the nutrition changes that, again, probably your audience is familiar with, starting to cut out a lot of meat. Dairy was never a big issue for me, so that was easy to do. And then I would say over like 9 months or so, eventually got to a place where I was plant-based. But within the first 2 months, the energy issues, the digestive issues basically all went away. And again, without like calorie counting or weighing or anything like that, all the weight came off by the end of that 9 months. And now I'm getting close to graduating, and I wanted to do, sports medicine chiropractor. That was kind of what that was my thought going in. And I'm like, wait, there's a lot more to it than that. And that's where I kind of dove even deeper into herbalism and stuff. And I kind of graduated starting that. And then it's just been building on more tools and more different things. And um, I guess it's a little different working with me than I guess what you would call a typical chiropractor, because it's a bit more than just getting adjusted. But um, yeah, that's kind of what it's become. So it's just been adding and learning different modalities, different techniques to add on to that, and really just try to learn and work with the whole person. So yeah, that's the story.
Nice. Very cool. Well, I can tell. I looked through your website. I saw some of the testimonials in there that yeah, you're well-rounded, very in-depth knowledge of so many different areas. I can tell from your patient testimonials is a huge benefit to have all those tools to help people.
Well, yeah, I think again with it, it's just again the nutrition, and it was the nutrition part that really motivated me to go this route.
Sure.
And I just found, even like kind of like we let off, like starting with that, I think is a fantastic starting point, but it's like one pillar of health. And you're only going to get so far if we don't address the others, or how to. And that's just, it's still, even now, like I feel like I'm learning something new every day just to add to that, so that it can, how do we simplify it? How do we make it more actionable? But yeah, so that's, yeah.
Cool. Love it. And if people want to follow you on your various platforms, I did link everything down below. I got your Instagram, your YouTube, your link tree, and your website. Is there anywhere else people would find you at online?
Um, no, those are the four main ones.
Okay.
Yeah, just at Dr. Vincent Esposito on YouTube and Instagram, and yeah, my website. I think my email is listed there, but it's a long email, so I'm not gonna read it out. But it's there.
Sure.
It's public. It's not hard to find. But yeah, those are the easiest ways to get in touch.
Okay, very
Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, highly encourage everybody to go out there. I've been really loving, like you said, you're learning something every day. I feel like, going to just on your Instagram, I was scrolling through a lot of your videos, and it's like I was learning a lot. Just, especially even things that I've been looking into for years. So I appreciate the detail-oriented posts and information that you put out for people to really grasp this holistic lifestyle information.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I do put a lot of work into it, so I'm really glad that hopefully you and others are getting some benefit from it.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. Okay, well, terrific. Let's jump in to the topic discussion. And again, we're talking about 6 ways to bring into balance your circadian rhythm. Do you want to start us off with the first kind of tip or idea that you have on this subject?
Yeah. So step one, I would say step one and two are kind of equal in terms of importance, but we'll start with this one. And it's just creating a sleep environment, a sleep sanctuary, I'll call it. and a consistent sleep routine. Now, the routine is pretty self-explanatory. The more consistent you are with it, the more energized you're going to get over time. It does take some time to adjust though with that. So when I work with people, if say you're going to bed at 1 a.m. most nights, probably jumping to, okay, let's go to bed at 10. You're probably either going to wake up early or you're not going to feel great the next day. So, understanding, say 10 o'clock is the goal, maybe scale that back slowly. So instead of 1 o'clock, let's go to 12:30, then let's go to 12 the next week, etc. Just so it's not a lot. You can brute force it. It just is going to be a bit more intense, and you're probably not going to feel too great in the short term. That's just been my experience working with people. But as far as routine, consistency is important. Now, what does it mean to make that sleep sanctuary? There's a few tips I like for that. So the first thing I mention to now all my patients, if I talk about sleep, is the 3-2-1 rule, or at least so called, which is 3 hours before bed, you stop eating anything, 2 hours, no liquid, just so that ideally you could stay asleep and not waking up in the middle of the night. And that includes things like herbal teas. I like herbal teas at later in the day, but try to give yourself a few hours if you can. And then number one, which is the more modern tip, is no screens an hour before bed. So I know that's old school. We'll talk about some other things you could do later on the list, but all those are big. Now, as far as the room itself, I recommend unplugging all electronic devices in the bedroom. If you have a Wi-Fi router, even if it's not in the bedroom, I would unplug it. Depending on where you live, I mean, I live in a pretty populated neighborhood, so I have street lights. Blackout curtains are your best friend. I would invest in them. They're fairly inexpensive. You generally want a cool room. So, depends on someone's, how warm or cold they like it. But generally speaking, somewhere between like 63 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit is like ideal. If you could leave a window open, even better. And then the last thing I would say is ideal bedtime. And this is where like the night owls don't like me. It's for human beings. It is between around like 9 and 10 at night. And that's going to change during the year, based on when the sun goes down. So, but generally speaking, it's somewhere in that window. That's ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think, yeah, probably the ones, I'm sure you probably see this, is the screen time and the bedtime. Are those two like the things that people struggle with the most?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't get a ton of pushback on like unplugging electronics or Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Because it is a pretty like low barrier to entry, so to speak, as far as
Hmm.
doing it. It's just getting in the habit of doing it. But those things really impact your ability to get into, say, deep sleep. And like electronic devices, if you use, say, like a digital alarm clock, that's again more light you're adding to your bedroom. So
Right.
there's no reason for it. You can either use an analog clock or you can use, I mean, what I do is I'll use my phone and I leave it on airplane mode, but I leave it on the other side of the room. So,
Sure.
I get up when I need to in the morning, I'll just shut it off and start my day. But those are definitely the two ones you get the most pushback on. And like the night owl thing is probably like the biggest thing, because it's just,
Mhm.
oh, this is how I'm wired. But the truth of the matter is, because I've read a lot on this, like these night owls, so-called night owls, don't exist in non-modern countries, or really never have before roughly like 100 years ago, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how could they? Right? How, if they didn't
Everything
have,
was dark.
yeah, no electricity. I mean, it's going to be kind of tough, but,
Yeah.
yeah. And
So
I should have asked this before, or like right away, but can you just explain, like, let people know what the circadian rhythm is and why it's important?
yeah, so the easiest way I think to explain it is, we as human beings are live in rhythms. Now, women are generally more obvious to this because they have monthly cycles, but we also, all humans, all actually animals, plants, have day-night cycles. Now, some animals are nocturnal, so they come out at night. Some are, we're out during the day. So what happens though is each cell in our body, each organ in our body is actually synced to those rhythms. So certain things become more active or less active depending on the type of day. And this is why when you're talking about things like detox and regeneration, most of that actually happens at night. The easiest, I guess, analogy for this is if you ever look at one of the traditional Chinese medicine 24-hour clocks,
Mhm.
a lot of the digestive organs, or what we would call detox organs, are most active overnight. They're your liver, your gallbladder, your large intestines, actually between like 5 and 7 a.m. One of the great good signs of good health is actually having a bowel movement first thing in the morning to get rid of all that stuff we processed overnight. So it's kind of interesting how you take kind of like these ancient wisdoms that have been around for thousands of years, and now we kind of have some science to back it up. But all of this is triggered by light signals. And that light signal primarily is the sun. Now this becomes an issue in modern times because we're looking at artificial suns all day, including right now. Now,
Right.
in the middle of the day, it's 12:30 almost near me right now. It's not as much of an issue. But if these things become more prevalent, particularly when you're getting wavelengths out of sync with nature, and especially with screens like this, that are mostly blue lit. I know there's a lot of colors, but the strongest signals tend to be in blue ranges. The blue ranges are brightest during the day. So if it's 10 o'clock at night and you're looking at a regular screen on a computer or your cell phone or whatever, you're getting signals through the eyes. The eyes are a direct connection to the brain that tell different parts of the brain, hey, it's daytime. We don't need to create melatonin to go to sleep right now. And you won't. And then it becomes kind of like this positive feedback loop where, it's midnight and now you're irritable and you've been scrolling for 2 hours, not really doing anything. And you wonder why, there's anxiety or depression or all these things, but it's really just related to these hormones getting thrown off because we are detaching ourselves from nature. So that is a very like simplified version of looking at it, but I'm trying to make it as concurrent with modern day as we can.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good to know. So the first thing that that I'll kind of throw out there for kind of balancing the circadian rhythm, and again, I'm very much a student in this. I'm just kind of looking into this stuff, so I'm sure you probably expound on some of these things that I'm bringing up. But so from what I understand, so the first one I'm going to say is to eat your polyphenols. All right, because from what I've read, the polyphenols, and I speak about polyphenols all the time because it's one of my favorite subjects to look into. So not only do they impact, they act as prebiotics for our good gut bacteria, which are linked to the circadian rhythm. From what I understand, they have a connection there, but also the polyphenols are, they basically turn on the genes related to something that I learned from Dr. Vincent, which is called the superchiasmatic nucleus, which is like the master control of the circadian rhythm. And so yeah, once I saw your video talking about that, I started looking into that. So then I came across the link between polyphenols and affecting the genes responsible for that, and how they kind of keep that synced how it's supposed to be. So that will be one thing that I'm just going to bring up is eat your polyphenols, get the colors in, and also how the light is one of the greatest influences on our circadian rhythm. And when we eat those polyphenols, we're bringing in, those are essentially light containing molecules. And so we're bringing in the light through our food. And that is also, I don't know exactly how it works, but I think somehow it must have an effect where it provides some, information within the body that helps it to regulate, and kind of understand the environment a little better when we bring that information in through those polyphenols. So I don't know if you have any insights on polyphenols and how that works.
So you're on it. Actually, and we could actually talk about these out of order because you kind of touched on like what steps 2 and 3 are.
Oh, okay.
3, I was going to talk about like the hydration food part, but let's start with that now that you brought it up.
Sure.
So the polyphenol part, there's 2 parts of that. So yes, you're correct in that the polyphenols are essentially part of what makes different fruits and vegetables the color they are. Right? It's what
Mm-hmm.
makes an eggplant purple, a raspberry red, and everything in between. What those are, if you think about it, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, are literally different frequencies of light. We have areas, or we have different compounds in our body. And one that you've heard of, I'm sure, is called melanin. Melanin is what determines what most people know it as is the compound that determines our skin pigment. So if you have darker skin, you tend to have more melanin in your skin. We have melanin in other places in our body as well. And one of the places that we have the most is in our brain. Now, melanin in its form is actually, it's effectively black, pitch black. And one of the ways to think about this is if you ever look at cephalopods or squids or octopi, one of the things that they might emit are things that black ink, like you'll see them come out, the ink part of squids. Yep. That is actually largely made out of melanin,
wow.
which is what makes it black. Now, black, as you know, absorbs all different frequencies, all of light. Now, that includes the visible light spectrum, but also outside of it. Now, the sun does include all visible light, but also infrared and UV. That's part of why being inside is an issue, but just keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that. As it pertains to food, though, those polyphenols do a few things. One is they'll help limit whatever inflammation there is in the brain, in the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is effectively the master clock, kind of like you alluded to. If you're limiting that level of inflammation in the brain, particularly in that area, you're going to have a better likelihood of being successful, getting consistent and regular with your sleep times. Now, along with the food part, there are definitely some, I would say this would fall under nutrition, parts that are going to impact that. One is fluoride. So, having fluoride in your water, and if you are American, it is in your tap water, is a neurotoxin. Just point blank, it is. So having something that is going to be inflammatory to the brain is also going to impact your sleep. So at minimum, if you're going to have water, you want a filter that's going to take that out. The other part of that is the structuring of water. That comes back to light, but that's also important when it comes to fruit and vegetables when you're talking about literally eating kind of small packets of light. That's actually what it is. So because water is so highly structured in especially fruits and vegetables, and they're also 90+% water, most of them, give or take. Some are more, some are a little less. But that's when you're consuming water that is so already structured, and then more importantly, has those electrolytes that you need to balance that, you're going to now increase your literal electrical conductivity in the body. So and that's what I actually call true hydration. So I'm not generally one of those people who is going to tell you, you have to drink, half your fluid ounces of water in body weight per day. Or I said that backwards, but you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I think hydration actually is the balance of those electrolytes, that sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, chloride. Where do most of those come from? Primarily fruits, but also in vegetables. Especially when you eat them raw, that is contributing to your water intake per day. And not only that, that water is now very mineral rich. and very structured. So you're going to have a better time assimilating it and getting to areas to help kind of run it better, especially in the brain, like the SCN. So that's where the food becoming the light signature, if you will, when we eat it is really important. And that's also why you'll see when we look at older researchers like Fritz Popp, who was, and some others who have done like the Curlian photography, you see the greater light emissions on organic plants, really more so than any other kind of food. We internalize that, and that becomes part of those signaling pathways. Now this is going to go way too off on a tangent, so I want to kind of reel it in. But that's the food part. That's how I look at it. It's less about the individual constituents from a biochemistry standpoint. Those are important, but I think it has to do more with the physics of water and light than the compounds themselves. Those are kind of the physics is what dictates the biochemistry, if that makes any sense.
Mm.
And that's a hard pill for me to swallow. And I think a lot of different practitioners, because all doctors, unless you're like a physics PhD or some what have you, we don't learn physics. It's all biology and chemistry. And there's been like a kind of a dichotomy and split, especially in health professions, but even like within biology, chemistry versus physics. So what I find, and it's interesting because when I've talked to more engineer types, they tend to be more open to this because they have that physics background. So it's coming as far as like that acceptance, because the biochemical model of health is, I mean, you don't have to look too far in America to realize that it's a complete failure.
Yeah.
We need to look at things in a different way, and bringing back quantum physics into it is really important. And that starts with food, which we kind of just touched on. The other part's light, because like the raspberry and the peach and the broccoli, we are also frozen packets of light that just happen to become material. The only reason the raspberry or the broccoli or the human being exists is because there's a sun in the sky. Now, of course, some people might roll their eyes and say, yeah, duh, but then we have, most modern health organizations will tell you, that the sun's going to kill you and cause cancer, when you see that the sunlight exposure, or I should say vitamin D deficiency especially, is associated with an increased incidence of literally every chronic disease that we're aware of.
Yeah.
So even like the dermatologist can't give you a good answer as to like why. It's just something you're told. And this is a split. I've kind of written on it in the past. I don't want to go into that. But what is important is you have to get bare skin and eye exposure to the sun. And this is particularly important for sleep, because guess what? If you are that night owl, the best way to start resetting that circadian rhythm is to get up and see the sunrise, because those initial wavelengths of light, which are mostly red in the morning, and that's anyone who's seen a sunrise can see that. That is the signal to kind of get your day started. So really, your sleep tonight started this morning, as far as how that's going to get dictated. So the first and probably most important step for sun exposure is getting out and seeing the sunrise. And that would be without glasses, without contact lenses, not through a window, especially, or your, what is it on a car? Windshield.
Yeah.
Because basically all modern glass is going to reflect a lot of different infrared and almost all UV. And this was done under the guise of being more solar efficient over time. Again, another story for another time, but most windows you see are going to block a lot of both of those. So we have to get our eyes on it. You also want to get skin exposure. Now, for the same reason. One is light actually does go directly through our skin, and that impacts our ability to create things like vitamin D, which like 80% of Americans or so are deficient in. So for sleep though, morning sunrise, I would say at least like 10 to 15 minutes, direct or indirect, if you have to get started in the middle of the day, you want to get those peak wavelengths too, because UV light has a lot of health benefits as well. And then sunset. Why sunset? Because that's going to be kind of the turning off, the getting ready for bed. Now, modern life tends to just completely disrupt that because we have the cell phones and the computers and the whole bit. So, but what that really is doing is getting you ready to wind down for the rest of the day. So as far as the sun exposure part, even those who have like really light skin, you should be able to get 10 to 15 minutes morning, day, evening. The cool part though is you could actually build up a solar callus over time. So even if you are sensitive to the sun, the best time to get out, in my opinion, would be the morning, because you actually build up, kind of like if you were to do weight training. You can't start to bench press 315 pounds. You kind of have to build up to that. It's literally the same concept. If you get exposure in the morning before those UV rays come in, you actually build up that skin strength, if you will, over time. What's also interesting and is so many medications, especially like antidepressant meds or psych meds, they tend to have side effects that are aligned with photosensitivity. Certain antibiotics and others do too. So it's not just that. But a lot of medications will have issues with photosensitivity. I think a lot of that has to do with those light signals. A lot of those drugs tend to impact the gut. Gut is where most of our microbiome is. That is also triggered, by the way, our light exposure. We don't look at it that way, but that's actually how it functions. It's different light signals at different wavelengths that are not necessarily the sun, but that's how they communicate. That's actually our cells communicate too. It's light frequencies. Again, Fritz Albert Pop is a great resource for that. There's a few others. I have some blog articles that talk about that in more detail, but there are researchers who have looked at this and see this. And when you get that right, you'll see actually changes in gut. You'll see change in gut microbiome composition. You'll also see the photosensitivity start to go away, but you have to basically re-expose yourself again. You can't just kind of go into it, but you have to build yourself up. So yeah, the sun exposure, the hydration through foods and the structured water and the polyphenols like you talked about, and the sleep sanctuary, those are like the top three, I would say, most important things as far as building it. Other than, of course, the eating part, taking out the things that are going to disrupt your sleep. So that's caffeine and alcohol, the processed carbs, the inflammatory seed oils, the gluten, dairy, like those are all going to impact your sleep negatively as well. But those are tend to be kind of, I think, more obvious, or people are aware of it, but might not choose to do it. It is important though, particularly the caffeine and alcohol.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
did I answer that? Because I know that was kind of like a long-winded answer.
No, that was amazing. I
Okay.
learned a lot there. And the thing that I did notice in the chat, somebody said my problem is on my way to work. This is coming from Karna, I believe. She said, on my way to work, when the sun comes up by this time of year, so would looking at the sunset work, or does it have to be in the morning? Did I read that right?
So are you asking like, can you do sunset instead of sunrise? That's how I heard it.
Oh, yep. I think that's what she's saying.
So first of all, any of it is going to be better than nothing. I find though sunrise is the most powerful. That's just tends to be just, what I've seen clinically. That doesn't mean you can't or shouldn't do both. Or if you can only do sunset, don't do the other one. Like whatever you can do, start with that. So yes is the answer.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that, because I think a lot of people might think they're driving in their car and they're getting sunlight, or, they're standing by their window and they're getting light, that the window pane is actually reflecting, filtering out essentially the UV and the
And most of
infrared.
the infrared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Fritz Pop, and then also, which I'm positive that you know about it. I think it's Gurwitz or something, where he did
Yeah,
the onion
the onion
experiment.
experiment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess quartz allows the UV and the ultraviolet or the infrared to go through, and that's how they figured out they were communicating.
Yes, yeah. So I'll expand on that a little bit. So it's
Okay,
really cool. So Gurwitch did some cool experiments with onions, and he also did some with different types of bacteria.
sure.
So I think the one you're referring to is the bacteria one, where he put one strain of bacteria in one petri dish, and then I think he left the other one empty, if I remember correctly. I might have this wrong, but he did two different versions. And he put a regular glass pane in the middle, and then in the other experiment, he put quartz. And what he found was he was able to find communication between the quartz pane, but not the regular glass pane.
Right.
And so yeah, like quartz does allow for more pure sunlight, if you will, light to transmit. And when I say light, all it is really is frequency. It's the same thing as sound.
Mm.
It's just we interpret it visually versus interpreting it through our ears. But the truth of the matter is it's the same thing. Like, in other words, color does have a sound. And you can actually like look this up. There are like different tunes and notes, and you can talk to like musicians and stuff. Like, this is a real thing
Yeah.
because different frequencies are associated with different really cycles per second. That's what it is. We can interpret that as sound, or we can interpret that as vision. Also important to kind of keep that in mind is like vision in general. Like, we assume, I know I used to, that like what I see is reality. But the truth of the matter is, if I happen to be not a human being and I was a pit viper who can see in the infrared spectrum, and they were just at the same point of view as I am right now, they would interpret everything very differently. It would look different. I don't know exactly how it would look because I don't know what infrared looks like visually.
Mm-hmm.
We make it up so that we can kind of look at different thermographies and things of that nature, but that's not actually what it looks like. We don't know because we can't see into that spectrum, but we feel it through heat. That's what infrared is. So it's keep that in mind, because I think a lot of this stuff seems esoteric because we can measure it in some ways, but it's not always perceptible. And I think when we get too caught up in the evidence base, not to say that evidence isn't important, because it is, but it is fundamentally limited to what we can measure right now. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
just because we can't measure it doesn't mean it doesn't exist or isn't real.
Right.
So
Yeah. I think
you gotta keep that in mind too.
yes, I think you could say that about several things. I mean, like even like pesticides and other synthetic chemicals, people can't see it, or even like air fresheners, these things, people can't see it, so they think that it's, there's nothing to worry about. But really, there is a huge impact when we come into contact with some of these things.
There is, and I think this is another, again, dichotomy between modern medicine and I think like this more quantum physics approach is like, we're looking for the cause, right? Like, that's kind of what we do. But the truth is, like, you could have had gut issues because of the glyphosate in the water and the air fresheners and all that. That's not the cause. It is a constellation of things. You can't say the one thing did it.
Right.
The answer is yes. It's all of it to some degree. I will never be able to tell you like with 100% certainty, this is 30% why, and this is 20% why. It is just the constellation of it. And I think we've been trained, honestly, as a culture to look, oh no, this is why. It's because of X. It's because of Y. It's because of Z. But that's not actually how it works. Everything plays a role to a degree. And it's that uncertainty I think people are uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And it either becomes overwhelming, so it's like, oh, it's too much, so I do nothing, or it builds up this fear kind of, aspect, which is not ideal either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in my opinion, anyways, that's a perfect reason why, like you said, it's not just one thing. You can't really pinpoint it for a lot of these things, but it's an accumulation. So in my mind, that would say you know, without getting into that super fear-based consciousness, you know, do your best to optimize as many things as you can in your life, because when you reduce the amount that can be accumulating, you know, you don't have to be perfect with everything, but if you can start to make little improvements here and there on different things, like the air fresheners in your home, or the shampoo that you use, or the deodorant that you use, you know, various things, how much sunlight you get, you know, starting with 15 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever you can do, that's going to just help reduce the toxic load, essentially, that, you know, is accumulated in the body.
That's
That
it. Exactly. Yeah. It's just the long game. Like there is no end date to this. I think that's another
Yeah.
thing that we're culturally trained is like, okay, I need to do this for how long until I see result X. And it's just like, no, this is what it is for life.
Right.
Now, granted, we have done a really good job again culturally to make it more difficult than it should be.
Yeah.
But you know, that's kind of that's the situation we're in for whatever reason. So you know, like every little bit is going to help. It's just a question of, you know, like you said, what's the lowest hanging fruit that you could get to today? And
Yeah.
then just add to it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect, but I could tell you I'm a hell of a lot better than I was 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. And I see it, you know, yes, you know, quote unquote, getting older. I mean, older, but, you know, I feel better now. I'm 32 than I was when I played a college sport when I was 18. So, you know, and then when I thought I was getting older when I was 19, like I mentioned earlier. So, you know, like it's just a question of like, okay, what are the little wins? And you just keep moving in that direction. Like there's always going to be more to do. I promise you, it's not going to end.
Right.
How, just what little bit more can you do like today, this week, this month? And you're not even going to recognize yourself in a year or two if you just take that, like just use that mindset.
Yeah. Totally. That's exactly my experience as well. And I was gonna throw out there, because one of my points that I was gonna bring up was getting at least an hour of sun exposure. I know even just as little as 5 to 10 minutes or whatever, that's helpful. But you know, making sure you get out in like the daytime sun, so like, you know, around midday maybe. But from what I understand, the more you're in the sun midday or throughout the daytime hours, the more serotonin your skin will produce. And serotonin and melatonin are on opposite diurnal schedules. So serotonin, maybe, yeah, you can expound on that, correct me if I'm wrong, but we produce more serotonin during the day when we're exposed to sunlight, and then in the nighttime our body's able to use that to convert it into melatonin. Is that correct?
Yes. So what I will say is this: there actually is no, in my opinion, upper limit to the amount of sunlight you can get. Now, granted, there are so many people who are unwell, particularly in America, that they will burn and get issues. But
Sure.
that is not the sun causing the problem. That is our inability to adapt to our natural environment. And when you realize that, then you realize, oh, like, you know, eating 10 servings of fruits a day and now I don't get sunburns. It's like, yeah, because you're not throwing like the inflammatory stuff and you're adding on top of it. It's literally just the way I always look at it is like, are you adapted to your natural environment? And that to me is the answer. That's how you answer that question. Because the
Yeah.
truth is, it wasn't that long ago where you were exposed to this stuff 24 hours a day, every day. It's really not that, especially in the grand scheme of, you know, life in general. We're talking 150 years, not even. So you know, like it's only the first lights, like electric lights, are less than 150 years old.
Right.
So you know, this isn't this is all brand new in the grand scheme of, you know, human life in general. So you have to kind of remember that and understand it's literally just us now going inside 95, whatever, 92, 93%, whatever it is, of our time indoors. We have to slowly, gradually reverse that. Now, to answer your question on the melatonin part, so the serotonin to melatonin part is correct, like kind of what you were saying. I find The alternate, if you will, tends to be more cortisol than serotonin specifically,
Okay.
because cortisol is actually the chemical reason kind of why you wake up in the morning. We get a huge cortisol spike in the morning, which is what wakes us up. And ideally, cortisol goes down throughout the day, kind of flatlines at night. And then as it gets close to night, melatonin in the bloodstream goes up. And that's what helps you go to sleep. And melatonin is produced in the brain in the absence of light, which is why sunset, and then ideally basically as close to complete darkness outside of obviously moonlight, but that's negligible in the grand scheme of things, is going to be helpful in boosting melatonin production in the bloodstream. Now, the truth is, this is a separate thing. Melatonin is actually, I would say, the master antioxidant in the body. And the reason is because most melatonin actually doesn't ever enter our bloodstream. It's made inside mitochondria in our cells. So it doesn't actually contribute to sleep or drowsiness in any way. It's actually what neutralizes free radicals in mitochondria on site during the not the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain. So all that stuff, that's what melatonin is mostly used for, like 95% of it in the body. That's been a fairly new discovery. I think I saw that the first papers on it were like either 2019 or 2020. So that's like pretty new.
Mhm.
But super fascinating nonetheless, because that's actually stimulated by infrared light exposure,
Mm.
which is why sunrise in particular is super important as well. Now, granted, infrared's out. As long as you see sunlight, there is infrared, but it's another kind of interesting component to that. But so again, long-winded, but I think I answered what you asked.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, do you have another one to throw out or?
So I do. I had two
Okay.
more quick. One we've
Oh,
kind of
sure.
talked about a little bit, but I might as well just kind of finalize it now. And I've found personally, like one of the best remedies to help you get a good night's sleep is some version of a really good workout. Usually there's some version of cardio involved. Now, it doesn't have to be like a long run, but it could be something relatively intense, like playing a basketball game or a soccer game or whatever. Something where you're breaking a legitimate sweat. You will tend to get a good night's sleep that night. So the more you do stuff like that, the better your sleep's going to get. As far as what to do, I don't think there's a right answer. I just think it's the thing that you enjoy doing, but it has to be intense enough that you're going to get a good night's sleep. So I like basketball, soccer, maybe it's tennis or pickleball, whatever it is that you like. It could be some sort of like high intensity workout or like a Zumba class or something. But something where you're going to break a legitimate sweat and is challenging to some degree. That is big. The other one is I wanted to kind of bring up, okay, if I'm not going to be on my cell phone or my computer at night, what am I going to do that last hour before bed? Now, ideally, I should say this too about workouts. In an ideal world, I wouldn't want to work out like right before bed if you can help it. I do think doing something is better than doing nothing. But I wouldn't in an ideal world, you wouldn't do like a heavy workout or something right before bed. Be that as it may. What are some other things you can do? Reading's usually a pretty easy one. Now I would like, if you're going to use a light, you could either use like a red reading light or some sort of like warm, either an incandescent bulb if you could get it. I know in my state they're illegal now, but
Yeah.
in terms of to sell them, or something warm. So like my wife and I have salt lamps in like
Mm.
strategic areas of the house. So we'll use those at night. Along with, I mean, I use blue blockers too. And we could talk about that if you want. Writing. So journaling, if journaling's your thing, do that. Uh, any version of meditation, light yoga or stretching. So it could be like a little bit. I think some people love stretching before bed. That's never been my thing. I like doing it in the morning, but some
Mhm.
people like swear by it. So go with it. And then there's also things like if you're, say have a family, maybe instead of watching a TV show, it's a board game or something else that you could do like around together where you're not relying on a screen. So or it could be, conversations or whatever it is you do. Like there are ways you can do it without using screens. Also prayer. So prayer, meditation is big, especially before bed. Some people like journaling. I know what I do, especially when I have trouble sleeping, is I'll list out the things that I need to do the next day. Because I know sometimes what keeps people up is, oh, I have to do this and this and that the next day. So, and sometimes it's just trying to remember all of it. I literally just keep a notebook next to my bed. It's not even what I would call a gratitude journal. Again, another option, but it's just, I need to jot these thoughts down so I know it's down. So when I wake up in the morning, it's there and I don't have to remember it anymore.
Yeah.
So any, you could do more than one of them. You could pick one. It really doesn't matter. I'm not going to sit here and say one's better than the other. It's the one you're going to do or the two you're going to do. So there's a lot of options. Again, something we're all trained to do is watch TV or whatever before bed or be on your phone. It is a habit that needs to get broken, and habits, generally speaking, based on at least the best science I'm aware of, it takes about 66 days to build a new habit before it goes from that like stress response. Because really, when you add a new habit, it's stressful in the beginning for it to become part of like your automatic system. So on average, it's 66 days. So the lie I was told when I was a kid, it takes 4 weeks or 30 days to create a habit. It's actually twice as long. Go figure. So
Yeah. Nice. Wow. Well, that great tips. Appreciate all that information. There's a lot of comments in here. People appreciate it as well, and some good questions that we'll have for the Q&A here. So, yeah, you mentioned the salt lamps. I love that idea, having the salt lamps for the light at night. I've also read amber colored, like night lights, or lighting. It blacks out blue light. Is that what you want? Is that correct?
yeah, so you definitely want warmer tones at night. So that's
Okay.
going to be like your red, orange, yellow, amber certainly fits into that. Again, ideally as dim as possible. Now, night lights, I should say, like ideally you don't want night lights on at night or
Sure.
like the plug-in ones that you would leave in all night.
Yep.
But definitely warmer tones. Incandescent bulbs are probably best if you could get them. Just because of the way the emission spectrum that they emit light. It's a little bit different than even like warmer LED lights, which is what most modern lights are.
Yep.
So those would be better options. And also ideally, most of the non-visual photoreceptors. So we have receptors for visible light, so what we perceive as color, but we also have non-visual photoreceptors, so light receptors that we don't interpret as vision. Most of those are actually located on the bottom portion of the eye, the inferior portion of the eye, which is actually genius design because guess what? The sun's over our head all day.
Yeah.
So another home hack, if you're going to have a light on at night, ideally it wouldn't be an overhead one. It would
Mm.
be ideally below eye level. Fire, like what was really the only source of light before light bulbs? It was a campfire, which
Right.
is ground level, right?
And
So
no UV or no blue light from
right,
campfire, from what I understand.
exactly, yeah. So if you're gonna have a light on at night, ideally it would be like eye level or below in terms of height. Again, that's tougher to do, but I would say if you could avoid, especially the overhead light, that does make, I found that makes a difference, especially when it comes to blue blockers. Cause I don't know if that's a question that's going to come up, but that's something that
Yep.
I've noticed just kind of wearing them is like, if I'm going to walk around my house, with blue blockers, but I have all the lights on, they're not going to do anything.
Uh,
They help. I find they're most helpful when you already have the other stuff accounted for. So like you're just using like, maybe a lamp versus an overhead light or something like that. Then I find it's more helpful. But if you're walking around and you have fluorescent lights on all night and you're expecting blue blockers to help, they're not. I mean, if you ever wore sunglasses, which is maybe another thing, but or anything, obviously there's a lot of places light can get in that isn't just directly in front of wherever the lens is. So
mhm.
just try to if I find that's when they're most effective.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
I've also heard that we absorb even blue light through the skin as well. So even if you're wearing blue blockers, you're taking it, and you've got all the lights on around you, you take it in through your skin as well. So that's impacting it. Is that what you understand?
Yes. Yeah. So you'll actually, it's interesting. So there are some people have looked at this in research. So like, and especially like say if you sit behind a window all day, which again is going to reflect basically all UV and basically most of infrared, all that's getting through is the visible light. So again, we don't perceive it as anything different. Some blue and green tones, again, in that spectrum is associated with photo aging. So light aging. So we associate it with UV. I don't think it's actually UV. I think it's actually the imbalanced blue and green spectrum when you're not getting the entire spectrum.
Hmm.
So if you were to look at it, say on a graph, you're basically just getting like a spike in this area from the computer without everything else around it. So the short answer to your question is yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. Cool. All right. Well, again, very, very helpful. I'm fascinated by this topic, so I'm just like taking in everything that you're saying. So, thank you for all that. I kind of had a third one. We've already kind of talked. It was basically, I was gonna say protect your microbiome. You know, it's already kind of come up a little bit, but you know, with the gut brain axis, and you know, making sure that you've just got your microbes who are influencing so many different aspects of the body. It's just, and you mentioned fluoride. I was going to say, just even besides the fluoride, the chlorine, the
Yeah.
disinfection byproducts, the aluminum that's in tap water, other heavy metals and pharmaceuticals, and avoiding taking unnecessary pharmaceuticals. You brought that up earlier too, because I mean, I don't think there's a pharmaceutical out there that doesn't have a negative effect on the gut. And
Not that
so,
I'm aware of.
yeah, yeah. So, if you're putting all these things into the gut and expecting to have, good sleep and good, rhythms within the body, it can really be a thing. And then also, I was going to say, not eating late at night, because
Yeah.
that also would affect your sleep, but also it throws everything off, right? And so, if we're thinking about living in harmony with our environment, as you alluded to, we wouldn't have these lights on at night, but also we wouldn't be, eating a lot of food at night either, and that throws off the natural rhythms that we have. Apparently, there's a liver cycle, or a liver rhythm that kind of impacts the overall circadian rhythm. Is there anything that
Every
you?
organ,
Okay,
every organ is on its own 24-hour cycle. Now,
gotcha.
and like I said, certain things are more active at certain times of the day.
Okay,
So just as it's what is it, one, like, middle of the day right now, 1 o'clock, well, at
yep,
least for me, 1 o'clock, 1:10. The liver knows that too. Now the liver tends to be more active at night because it's one of those more heavier detox organs, but it knows that. So it's less active at doing that type of stuff during the day versus it would be at night. So that's its circadian rhythm. All this stuff is, I explain it like it's more fractal than anything. So I mean, that's really what it is. It's all the same concepts, just at what scale you're talking about.
hmm,
So, a human being is a super organism compared to the gut microbiome, where there's billions and trillions of different bacteria and fungi and viruses and all that and the whole bit. But even they are large compared to certain things too. So it's just a matter of scale, but the functions like really are the same. It's just literally just what scale are you looking at? So yes, I do want to bring this up though with the antibiotics and the gut microbiome quick,
yeah,
because this is important. The best I know, and I don't want to like end this with like a Debbie Downer note, but it's important to know, like, we've seen like sometimes doing like a round of antibiotics, and there are still people doing this where they get ear infections and they take antibiotics, which do nothing for actually nothing for ear infections. And again, infections is a whole nother thing to go down. But to recover from antibiotics takes a long time, like on the order of, to a couple of years potentially. And I've seen even some research where if you wipe out certain strains, they might not come back ever. So, and that's what makes it really tough. So, like, and that's one round of antibiotics. So imagine, the flu comes around and you're doing like a Z pack a couple times a year, every year or something like that. Like, there's a lot of healing that needs to go on from that. Now, the interesting part, if you want to bring it back to light, and this is super interesting. So there was another study I saw. I wrote about it in a blog, and I was trying to look up which one. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but there was a woman, I believe she was Canadian researcher. She took two groups and she exposed one group to a UVB light, not even the sunlight. They used UVB light, and the other group, they did, I'm pretty sure, nothing. And what she found was actually there were actually changes in the UVB light groups gut microbiome in a positive way without changing anything they ate or changing anything else they did. It was just exposure to a UVB light, which is the light that your average dermatologist is telling you going to give you skin cancer. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, I just find it super interesting. Like, even outside of food inputs, which is, I know what I learned. It's just forced me to look at things differently and kind of look more into Gurwitch and Fritz Pop and all these other people who have just looked at this in a different way. And like, maybe we're all looking at it too much from the biochemistry standpoint, and where in a lot of places, physics has become more, I should say quantum physics has become more easily adopted. Just in the biology and the health space in general, it never has been, or at least to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're getting close to a point where there isn't going to be a choice. We're going to have to, or it can't get much worse from a public health standpoint than it is right now.
Right.
So I'm very excited to see where it goes as far as that, because it's just very interesting to see things like red light, sunlight impact the gut independent of food choices. And then when you actually bring in the most highly structured foods, the most ones that are directly impacted by light due to polyphenol counts, also impact that. Like, I think it's all part of the same story. We've just talked about it in a chemistry standpoint versus a physics one. And that's been super fun to kind of put together the last year or so.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. That's the topic I've been studying the most lately is biophotonic light, and how we take in the incoherent light from the sun, and our cells utilize that and put out coherent light to communicate.
It's super fascinating. It's like the coolest thing to learn, even for me right now. So
Yeah.
I am definitely not an expert on it, but it's the most exciting thing that I think I've learned in the last, probably in my career, as far as like practicing.
Yeah.
It's that cool, and I think that powerful.
Agreed. So cool. All right. Well, I mean, I could talk about this topic for about 4 more hours or more, but let's hop into the Q&A here. Again, thank you so much for sharing all of that great information. It's super helpful and easy to apply. You gave some really practical ways that people can apply this information. So I know people will take a lot from this. So thank you for that. And just a reminder to everybody before we jump into the Q&A, where is the best place to find you, Dr. Vincent? And I've got it all linked down below, but if you could just share it quick.
Yeah, the easiest way is social. So primarily it's Instagram, and now that I'm moved, it's going to be back on YouTube. It's at Dr. Vincent Esposito. And then my website is insideouthealthwellness.com. Those are the three probably easiest ways.
All right, perfect. Let's jump into the Q&A room here and get these questions rolling. I know I've kind of glanced at the chat here a few times, and I did see quite a few questions. So let's scroll back up here. And again, guys, if you ask a question in today's show, you're going to be in the drawing to win one of my ebooks and Dr. Vincent's ebook as well on sleep. So let's see here. Judith jumping in here saying, have you ever had banana water? Just just bananas and water blended in a Vitamix.
No, I don't think so. I think the closest I've ever come is making like banana ice cream, which I guess is usually like banana and or like, peaches or strawberries. That's probably the closest I've come. Have I ever had banana water? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, me neither. I'll have to give that a try.
Yeah.
She also asks, do you supplement with D3? If so, what do you suggest for those of us who have a long, cold winter?
So do I personally know? The best option, I understand now it's September in the northern hemisphere, so the weather's turning colder.
Mm-hmm.
Your best bet is to absolutely optimize being outside in the summer months and spring months, and even now, while it still is bright. And because things like vitamin D, because it's fat soluble, it tends to store well in the body. So one of the reasons why people who move further from the equator have lighter skin is you can absorb more of that with less intensity. Because the further you go away from the equator, the less intense the sun is, generally speaking. You can actually withstand a winter without it. Now, again, this assumes, most people, when the sun's out, probably are wearing little, if any, clothes, because remember, humans are the only animal on this planet that also wears clothes. Something to think about. Again, not trying to, scare your neighbors or anything, but also think about it. Like, no, you don't see a lion or a boar or a moose ever get skin cancer. Just throwing that out there. You have to optimize it when you can, as much as you can. And even in those winter months, face exposure, hand exposure, like when you can, as ideally, again, every day, even if it's a few minutes, that does help. The one thing with D3, and this is actually another study, there's a few of them that I've written on, is that I've seen some where if you take D3, it actually negatively impacts your ability to create it on your own. Because remember, D3 or vitamin D in general is a misnomer. It's a hormone. Anytime you're going to take an exogenous hormone, whether it's any type of HRT or TRT or whatever, you are impacting your body's ability to create it, store it, utilize it on its own, because it's going to downregulate your own ability to make it. So you actually see it now. Like, there are some people, if they take twins, there's a couple, I have to find it, but they take twins or relatives that, generally same skin complexion, etc. One takes a D3 supplement, one doesn't, for a certain amount of time. Then the summer comes around, they both stop, or the one stops taking it. That one might have started with higher D3 levels, but the other one had actually a better capacity to create it endogenously. And remember, like, D3, if you're looking at a blood test, I look at it as an analog for sun exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is that fixed mindset. This is low. You have to take this to fix the problem. It's a sign of a larger problem. The larger problem is you got to go outside. Have to. You can't out supplement that. Look, for some people, can D3 be effective? I have started to back away from doing that and really harp on this for people, because you're not going to get all the benefits of sunlight from taking a D3 supplement. That's just not going to happen.
Right.
So context depends on person to person, but you have to like prioritize getting outside when you can. And especially if you live in a climate where you have a legitimate winter, you especially have to during the times you can.
Yeah, great answer, and one that I personally. So, I'm totally in line with everything you just said. However, I have been taking sublingual D3 because I have had low vitamin D levels, which I totally get that it's actually just a marker of your sun exposure. Because I've been more intentional with it the last few years, but my levels were getting pretty low. I also have a vitamin D lamp. I don't know what your opinions are on that because I've been, I'm not a huge supplement supporter, but I understand they can be useful in some situations. But so I try to get it as naturally as possible. So I got the D lamp. What do you think about that?
I think those are good.
Okay.
I think those are good options. I will say if you're going to use a D lamp, like a Spurdy lamp, I think is the most popular one.
Yep.
Um, I would supplement it with either getting actual sunlight or a red light, a red infrared,
Okay.
and you do both.
Nice.
If you're going and I will say this, I would much rather you do that. I understand it's a bigger upfront cost, but it should ideally last you your entire life. So it will save you money long term if you live in, say, like one of those types of climates.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would rather you do that than a D supplement. Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think it's so important that people understand that is that, when you take a D supplement or even the vitamin D3 or the UVB lamps, yeah, there's when you go out into sunlight, you're getting bathed in red, yellow, purple, Roy G. Biv, you're getting all of those colors bathing your cells, including the gamma rays and X-rays and everything else outside of the visible spectrum. But when you take these isolated nutrients or wavelengths, it's not going to be the same. You're not getting all of the different frequencies that you would normally get being outside. So yeah, I think people forget that when they think they're taking the D3 and they're getting the benefits of the sun.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, absolutely. And I think for sure the light is better. I understand it's a bigger upfront cost, but
Hmm.
again, it should last you your whole life. And it's going to be you're going to get a wider spectrum of benefit than just taking a vitamin D supplement that's probably highly processed and et cetera. And to your point, like I tend to not use isolate supplements a bunch. I use herbs with folks
Hmm.
because again, I do think there are properties to herbs and such that we don't fully understand yet or understand the capacity of because I think there are more subtle energetic components, part of which is light, that are better when you get them in a holistic form. So if you can get light, even if it's a narrow band, a UVB in this example, that's going to be better than a vitamin D supplement over time. Yes.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you for that. Let's see. Janet is asking, and we kind of touched on this already, but she said, does using blue blocker glasses at night help with sleep?
Yeah. So just to like reiterate quick, it's not, the be all end all, but if you're doing some of the other stuff to keep a relatively dim environment, that's when I find they're most effective. So, and what I mean by that is, the salt lamp example we talked about, or using a reading light, but the rest of the room is dark. That's where I find they're most effective.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Faithful Style says, I tend to use my phone to play rain sounds to help me fall asleep. Is a white noise machine okay to have if there's no light on it?
Um, more of the recent stuff I've seen, actually, believe it or not, is that white noise might help some people fall asleep, but it actually disrupts brain patterns,
Mm,
like brain waves and things of that nature. So you don't actually end up getting the best sleep. And it does impact memory, cognitive function in a negative way.
wow.
So, if you can get away with not using white noise machines, the better.
What about a fan? Same thing?
I would say like a fan or is probably better.
Okay.
And again, some things we're not going to get around, right? So like
Right.
if you have a central air conditioner and it goes on every time, you reach a certain temperature, you're not going to get to zero. I get it. But I think it's better than the artificial white noise.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I can't say like for sure, but my inkling is it's probably better than the artificial white noise.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Um, Judith says, "Is organic peppermint tea a good choice for a warm drink?" Have any opinion on
Sure.
that?
Peppermint tea is great. I would
Perfect.
say at night, if you're looking for something at night, I like chamomile.
Hmm.
That's my go-to. I mean, I will say valerian for me works great, and it works great for a bunch of people. Not the best flavor, but it works. But a lot of people don't love how it like the flavor. But and there's a few other good ones too. Lemon balm's great for people. Skullcap, passion flower, which is pretty neutral. Holy basil. There's a bunch of different like herbs and teas you can use. Chamomile's my personal favorite. But if I was like really struggling to sleep, I would say valerian would be the one I would go to. But in terms of flavor, not my favorite.
Nice. And,
Yeah.
and maybe eat some cherries during the day, right? Does that actually help? The melatonin in cherries, they say.
So cherries do contain like a small amount of melatonin. I am hesitant to say that it actually helps with sleep.
Okay.
They might for some people, but I think it's pretty negligible.
Gotcha.
But it is true that they do contain melatonin, and there's very few foods that contain melatonin. But again, most of the melatonin that you're going to actually need to fall asleep is going to be made internally.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, Valley says, "I've heard that melatonin production decreases as we get older. Is this correct? And what are your thoughts on supplementing with melatonin at bedtime?"
So, like the other hormones that we mentioned, I'll answer the second part first. So, like the other hormones that we mentioned, if you supplement with, say, melatonin, you're going to negatively impact your body's own ability to make it. So, what I see happens with people who use it, and these are not me recommending it, it's usually people who come in and have tried it, is it works great for month one, month two, month three, then I need more. And then it becomes a bigger need and it becomes a dependency type of thing. So, some people have recommended like not taking it for longer than a month. Ideally, I would say don't use it at all because you are going to negatively impact your ability to make it. So if you don't need it, don't use it. There are definitely other, I think, herbs and stuff that are better in a tea form or something like that that are not going to create this like dependency type phenomenon. So I would lean to some of the herbs I mentioned earlier. Like that's where I would start if I needed like a sleep aid. And there are certainly other things too. There's flower essences. There's Rescue Remedy, Bach Rescue Remedy, essential oils like lavender. As long as you don't have a cat, um, so that's always one that comes up.
Right.
Um, yeah, I would start with those if like you needed some sort of support for sleep, I would start with any of those first. I would not reach for melatonin, and if for whatever reason it got to that point, it would definitely be temporary. And by temporary, I mean shorter than 4 weeks. And again, I've never gotten to that point with people, but if for whatever reason I had to, that's the longest I would go.
Nice.
But it hasn't happened yet. So the first part of that question was what? I forgot.
It was, does melatonin production decrease as people get older?
um, I mean, I think like, we as Americans, this is, I think, a bigger thing because I think we as Americans have a really bad relationship with aging in general. That this concept of like, oh, we're breaking down, we're getting worse, and this and that. Look, does it happen? I think it could happen a little bit, but it's mostly going to be dictated by your environment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. Like I joke about it all the time because, I've spent a bunch of time over the years in Florida, and there are certain areas that have older populations, and everything closes at 8, and it's like that's where I want to be. That sounds great. Uh, so, not it doesn't have to is my point. It's going to be more dictated by your environment than anything.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like anytime I hear something like that, like, oh, we have less stomach acid production as we get older, or, any of these things, I think it's a lot of it, personally, I think is just like a consequence of trashing the body for so many years. It's gonna, yeah, just not gonna work the same over time as it's been, accumulating more and more toxic crap. So,
I agree. That is what it. I think that's largely what you see, especially when folks get older. And
yeah,
then you wonder, you bring the stomach acid part. Why do so many folks struggle with osteoporosis in their 60s and 70s? Where do you get calcium? It's from the stomach. It gets absorbed if you have stomach acid.
sure.
So those things are related, right?
Yeah,
So you have to like look at that whole picture, and most of those things we just look like, oh well, you got older, or oh well, you're in menopause, so now your bone density. It's like, no, that's not how these things have been. These are all new problems.
yeah,
So, and also then it goes back to sun exposure, because guess what? How are you going to build healthy bones? Part of that is with vitamin D and calcium absorption, which comes from sunlight. So
right.
goes back to that too.
Yes,
So you have to kind of look at the whole picture.
perfect. Agreed. All right, just a couple more here. I think we got one or two more. Valley says, how long does it take your body to be able to restart its natural production of D3 after stopping the supplements?
That's going to be a function of how long you've been taking it. The longer you've been taking it, the longer it's going to take to come back to it. And it's also going to be affected by how much sun exposure are you getting. So it's not like there's one answer to that question, or there's one factor, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be many factors. How well are you able to absorb it? How much skin exposure are you getting to the sun? Like, are there any medications you're on? What does the rest of your lifestyle look like? So it isn't like there isn't one way to answer that question. But I will say, generally speaking, the healthier you are and the shorter you've been taking it, the quicker you're going to bounce back.
Perfect. Is it true, Maria asks, is it true women need more sleep than men?
You know what? I've seen like a couple like research papers that have said that, but then I've also seen some that don't. So I'd be lying to say if I knew the answer to that question. Um, I will say though, now being a new parent, certainly during those early months, I would say, yeah, probably more.
Right. That makes sense.
But that's totally anecdotal. But like over the long term, I actually don't know. And if there was, I can't imagine it being, it's going to be plus or minus 30 to 60 minutes. It's not going to be like a major amount. So, and even when they talk about it, it's going to be within 60 minutes. So it's not a much greater amount. It's not that significant if it does exist.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think we all sleep under the same sun and moon, right? So
we
we all
do.
you'd think it'd be similar.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Right. All right, last one here. From Maria again. She says, is listening to meditation or healing frequency okay before sleep in an offline mode? So I think she's from her phone, probably.
Yeah, I think meditation's great before bed. I think that's a fantastic thing to do. The bigger issue I think with white noise is that it's constantly going all night. So like if you do a meditation, say you fall asleep to it, I would assume it's going to end at some point, right? So when it's over, and then it's fine. So yeah, I think that's actually a great way to do it. If that's when meditation works best for you, go for it.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for all the questions, and thank you, Dr. Vincent, for answering all of those with such great information. If I missed your questions, guys, I got to remind you, please put, if you're going to ask the questions earlier or even anytime, if you can just put question marks before your comment, because there's a lot of comments as well, so it's hard to pick them out. So if I missed any questions, I apologize. Dr. Vincent's links are all in the description box below. So if you want to run a question by him separately, definitely I recommend reaching out to him. But yeah, let's quick do the drawing here. So we have our newly installed wheel of names that we...
Wow.
Yes, I know. It's pretty fancy. So I've got, let's see, we got Judy, Karna, Janet, Faithful Style, Valley Tom, and Maria, all in the wheel here. So I'm just gonna, again, I hope I didn't miss anybody. If I did, just yell at me. But here we go. We're gonna spin to see who is the winner of the ebooks. It looks like Janet. Janet.
All right.
There you go, Janet. Congratulations. Just send me an email at matt@myrawintuition.com, and we will get you hooked up with any one of my ebooks that you don't have. And then Dr. Vincent is going to give you his ebook on sleep. So thank you very much again, everybody, for all your great questions and for being here and participating in today's conversation. Thank you, Dr. Vincent, for the incredible knowledge that you shared with us today and taking time out of your day to be with us.
No, thank you. It is an honor coming on, and happy to come on again and talk about this or another topic sometime in the future. Happy to do it.
Terrific. Yeah, I'd love to have you back on, as many times as I can. So I'll reach out to you in the future for sure. And I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. Again, everybody check out Dr. Vincent's links in the description box below. Follow him on all his social media and go to his website for more information on connecting with him in other ways. So again, thanks everybody, and tune in next week for another episode. Same time, same place. We'll have another topic to discuss. But until then, always follow your raw intuition.